virology was the origin of this virus?
Yes, I have. Yes, I have.
The president is considering retaliatory measures against China pending an investigation, though his own U.S. intelligence community has concluded the virus was not man-made or genetically modified.
Intelligence is just an estimate, essentially, and it's up to policymakers to decide what to do with that intelligence. In this case, the policymaker is the President of the United States, and he'll make that decision at the right time.
Over on Capitol Hill, the Senate is gearing up to return next week. Despite warnings from the Capitol physician, there are not enough COVID-19 tests for all members. House committees will return to Washington to conduct in-person business and work on legislation, but the full House will not be in session. Skylar Henry, CBS News, the White House.
So to dig in this further, we're joined now by Francesca Chambers. She's a White House correspondent for McClatchy. Francesca, thanks for being with us. Let's get right into it. During an interview yesterday, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said that the U.S. did not know where the virus began, and the intelligence community also said that there's no evidence that the virus was man-made. So how is the White House handling this apparent disconnect between the president and his own executive branch, multiple members of it?
Well, yesterday, the president, in extended remarks at that event, went on to say that the medical experts and the intelligence community are still putting together a response to what they believe happened here. But asked about it, as you just referred to at the White House today, the new press secretary said that they weren't inconsistent and tried to prove that there was no daylight in between what the Secretary of State had said and what the president had said prior to today.
Yeah, but it's nice to try and say that there's no daylight between it. But in reality, let's just fact check this, Francesca, for our viewers. The intelligence community, the Secretary of State say that they don't have any evidence, but the president, without providing any additional information, said that he actually did see evidence, which is different from what they were saying, how they were trying to spin it, right? Which was that they haven't found any evidence yet of its origins, which is very different from insinuating that it was man-made or that it did in fact come from that research facility in Wuhan, right?
And the key to what you just said, too, is that the president provided no evidence for that assertion. And when he was pressed on it, he then said that he couldn't say what it is currently, suggesting that it was intelligence that others didn't have access to. But again, asked about it today when he appeared on a podcast, he said that most of what he was basing that on is actually things that everyone in the public had seen. And so, to your point, if that were the case, what he said yesterday just doesn't line up with what Mike Pompeo and other intelligence agencies had said.
All right. And Francesca, let's also discuss the president's comments on China. He said that he's considering retaliatory measures against the country. What could those look like?
Well, he suggested that some of the tariffs that he had planned to take off of China related to the trade deal, or the trade deal he had said that they had negotiated that they had not quite finalized, would be something that he would continue to look at, because he said that the coronavirus is more important than a potential trade deal. And so that might highlight some of the ideas that he has, but he also hasn't detailed those, and the White House exactly.
And Francesca, another thing on this subject, the president was pushed on his initial assessment of how China was handling things, his public tweets praising the Chinese for their handling of the coronavirus, and his public position now. And he was asked what changed about that, and he said that he was trying to negotiate a trade deal. But he never clarified when followed up if it was that he was trying to negotiate a trade deal, which had already happened, and that's why he was being complimentary towards the Chinese, and that he didn't really believe that. Has the White House further clarified how the president changed his assessment of how the Chinese have handled this, and what has actually led to those differing assessments?
No, they haven't done that today. And it's worth noting that the president has swung between being hard on China and letting up on China, saying that Xi Jinping, he wants to be friends with him, that he wants to negotiate the trade deal with him, then also saying things that China could be a currency manipulator. And so really putting on the gas pedal and letting off pretty much since he was a candidate, and now we see him as the election gets closer, putting the gas back on China, and also bringing up the election. As he said that, he brought it up in an interview yesterday, saying that China doesn't want him to get reelected as president. They want Joe Biden to get reelected. He has brought that up again yesterday at an event too. So he is the one who is tying these two things directly together, his reelection and this virus in China.
And Francesca, I want to ask you about that. Is there evidence of those claims that the Chinese are trying to push for Joe Biden to be elected or interfering in the election process in any way?
Well, if the president has evidence of that, he has not directly referred to that when he has said those things.
All right. And Francesca, you also have some reporting about some of the items that the White House is looking for when it comes to phase 4 stimulus funding. What does the president want, and what support do those wishes have on Capitol Hill?
So the president has his National Economic Council looking at potential tax breaks for consumers and for businesses that he could pursue as part of this phase 4 stimulus negotiation. Now, Democrats on Capitol Hill have made it very clear that they want assistance for cities and they want assistance for states that are cash-strapped. The White House and conservatives have been resistant to that idea. The president claims that they're cash-strapped because of quote-unquote bad management. And so he does not want to do that. He has floated sanctuary cities and getting rid of them as something he would like to see, but I've been told that could be a potential red herring. It's the art of the deal, right? You put something out there that you know you're absolutely not going to get so that you can get at least a few of the things that you'd like to see. And the White House has said that they are more interested in the tax breaks that he has NEC pursuing.
And you also have some reporting about African American community leaders and what they want to hear from the White House. Tell us about that.
So African American leaders have been pressing the president since the first year of his administration to do better outreach to them, really. And as the coronavirus unfolded and African Americans and other minority populations were found to be disproportionately affected, those concerns have risen to the top again, with them saying that the White House needed to do more outreach to African American leaders, but also more to spread the message about stopping the spread of the coronavirus in African American communities. And so the president and the White House have announced a few new initiatives that they're pursuing related to this, but we're still waiting for more details.
Let's go back to the campaign trail and a discussion about Biden. Joe Biden Friday denied sexual assault allegations that were against him by a former Senate staffer, Tara Reade, who says that the former vice president sexually assaulted her back in 1993. How is this drawing attention to past allegations made against President Trump? And how could this impact his re-election campaign or the campaign of his competitor, Joe Biden?
So while it put it on display for Joe Biden, it also came up at the White House press briefing today. There was a question in the context of Joe Biden about the past allegations against President Trump. And that's why this is a double-edged sword issue for the Trump campaign. They have highlighted this allegation against Joe Biden, but President Trump in the 2016 election, more than a dozen women accused him of sexual harassment. And the White House wanted to say today that those were issues that were decided by the 2016 election by President Trump being elected. But it doesn't change the fact that he was also accused by women of this behavior, and it is certainly going to bring it front and present all over again with this Joe Biden issue.
All right, one last question for you. I feel like we're doing a lightning round with so many questions to you, Francesca, but the president announced today that he will travel to Mount Rushmore for July 3rd and a fireworks display celebrating Independence Day. We also know that he is traveling to Camp David on Friday, Arizona next week. After a very long time where the president was rather stationary in the White House, with one exception, what is accounting for all of this travel and announcements of travel? And is this part of the president's re-election campaign and a feeling like it's important to show that the president is starting the economy again?
But it's also related to the fact that he's just tired of being cooped up in the White House. He's mentioned that so many times over the past couple weeks about how he's claimed he's been there for months and months. It hasn't been months and months. It's been a little bit under 2 months since he's left the White House for a big event. The March 8th weekend was the last time he was in Florida. And so the president just ready to get back out there. Meanwhile, the vice president has already been doing some travel. That was something that the White House did to gear up for the president to start traveling again. The president also said this week that he's looking at taking a trip to Ohio soon. Those are official White House events. Those aren't campaign events. No campaign events that we know of yet, but again, he made it clear this week that he'd like to get back out on the campaign trail, even if he can't have those 25,000 person rallies that would certainly be unsafe at this point based on the CDC guidelines.
Well, I know that feeling of cabin fever exists, and it is real, and I guess it even is real if you're in the White House. Here's hoping that everybody's travel, whenever it happens, is safe. Yeah, Francesca Chambers, thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
Federal guidelines to slow the spread of the coronavirus expired at midnight. At least 33 states have eased their own restrictions, while others extend stay-at-home orders. Michael George reports on how both decisions are sparking protests.
Dozens of drivers honked as they drove by the governor's mansion in St. Paul, Minnesota Friday afternoon. The May Day caravan is calling on lawmakers to cancel April and May rent and mortgage payments because of the economic strain of the coronavirus lockdowns. In Michigan, which has the third most coronavirus deaths in the country, demonstrators protested the governor's decision to extend stay-at-home restrictions.
I don't agree with it. We just flat out, we need to get back to work.
But in Georgia, people against the decision to lift restrictions protested by driving hearses around the state capitol. More than 30 states have now eased some restrictions, even as the number of confirmed coronavirus cases in the U.S. climbed to more than 1 million. New York has more than 300,000 of those cases. Still, hospitalizations are on the decline, and in a sign of progress, the field hospital set up here at the Javits Convention Center is closing today. Bagpipers played, and healthcare workers clapped as the final patient to be treated at the Javits Military Hospital was discharged. 69-year-old New York resident Francisco Velasco, who spent more than 2 weeks there. There was more recognition of the work of medical staff Friday with a flyover of B-52 bombers over hospitals in New Orleans and Baton Rouge. Michael George, CBS News, New York.
Joe Biden publicly addressed a sexual assault allegation against him on Friday, saying that the incident, quote, never happened. Catherine Herridge has the details.
No, it is not true. I'm saying unequivocally, it never happened.
Responding to the sexual assault claim that he's been under increasing pressure to address, Joe Biden spoke out to MSNBC.
Women have a right to be heard, and the press should rigorously investigate claims they make. I'll always uphold that principle. But in the end, in every case, the truth is what matters. And in this case, the truth is the claims are false.
In 1993, Tara Reid worked in then-Senator Joe Biden's office. She says a supervisor asked her to deliver Biden his gym bag, and he assaulted her in a Capitol Hill hallway.
I remember the coldness of the wall, and I remember his hands underneath my blouse and underneath my skirt, and his fingers penetrating me as he was trying to kiss me.
Reid's allegations have expanded over time. Last year, she told a Northern California newspaper that Biden, quote, used to put his hand on my shoulder and run his finger up my neck. I would just kind of freeze. However, she didn't tell reporters about the alleged assault until this March. Reid, a self-described lifelong Democrat, says she did speak with her supervisors in Senator Biden's office at the time about alleged sexual harassment from the senator, and then faced retaliation.
It shattered my life and changed the trajectory of my whole career in life, and I lost my job after I complained, and I was fired.
But two former Biden Senate staffers Reid claims she spoke to told us they had no recollection of any complaint. If there are records, Biden said they would be in the National Archives.
I'm asking the Secretary of the Senate today to identify whether any such document exists. If it does, make it public.
Reid has spoken to CBS News multiple times in the past month. And on Wednesday, CBS formally requested an on-camera interview.
Coming up after the break, protesters, some armed with guns, fill Michigan State Capitol. We'll show you how the governor is responding as she handles a shortage in COVID-19 testing. Plus, researchers in the UK say that they're one step closer to a vaccine for the masses. We'll have the latest. You're streaming Cbsn, CBS News, always on. Beijing's Forbidden City was filled with people Friday for the first time in several months. The popular tourist destination had been closed because of COVID-19 concerns. About 70% of China's attractions reopened on Thursday. The sites are not allowed to exceed 30% of their capacity limit, though. Several places, including the Forbidden City, are requiring people to present health information on their phones. India is expected to ease restrictions as the second phase of its national lockdown is set to expire on Sunday. The country imposed 2 rounds of lockdowns to curb the spread of COVID-19. Officials say new rules will be established next Monday, May 4th, including when and where the lockdown could be lifted. Analysts suggest that India is easing up on restrictions since its economy has taken a major blow and that 80% of the country has not been severely affected by the virus. Prime Minister Boris Johnson says that the United Kingdom is, quote, past the peak of the outbreak. Johnson is expected to unveil a reopening plan next week. It will detail steps to restart the economy, reopen schools, and get people back to work. The UK has confirmed more than 172,000 cases of coronavirus. More than 26,000 people have died there. Mass graves are being dug in Brazil as the country struggles during the coronavirus outbreak. More than 13,000 graves were dug at a public cemetery in São Paulo. At least 80 graves per day have reportedly been created over the past 2 weeks. Burials are being performed by workers in full hazmat gear. Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro has reportedly downplayed the threat of COVID-19. The country has confirmed more than 87,000 cases. Medical researchers in the UK say that they're one step closer to a coronavirus vaccine. Ian Lee reports on the human trial now underway.
The race around the world continues for a coronavirus vaccine, but this lab at Oxford University is one step, rather one shot closer to ending the pandemic.
It's very much a British play that if it works out could be a mammoth event for the globe.
That British play includes teaming up with pharmaceutical giant AstraZeneca to get it to the masses. The company says it's primed to produce the vaccine.
By June, July, we will have a first idea already of the efficacy and safety of this vaccine.
So I need a scratch.
Human trials began last week with nearly 800 volunteers. The process has been fast-tracked due to the urgency of finding a vaccine.
Okay.
If successful, they hope to produce 30 million doses by September. And getting the jab shouldn't break the bank.
Our commitment is that for the period of the pandemic, we will actually be supplying the vaccine at cost.
When rolled out, the UK will have first priority, with the US following shortly after. Ian Lee, CBS News, London.
So apparently there's a right way and a wrong way to wear protective masks. Ellen Janae with our CBS station in Denver, KCNC, shows us how.
You know, I think people are doing their best.
We're trying to do good with this mask thing.
Well, I know it's inconvenient and they're not comfortable.
People aren't wearing these things properly, right?
Well, there's a lot of variability out there.
Denver Health's Dr. Connie Price has been working on an instructional video.
But a lot of people use these. This is what I use at home.
A bandana can work just fine for most of us. Manufactured masks may be better.
These are made from a type of paper and different fibers.
But be cautious.
Without a validation from an approved agency, I wouldn't trust it.
UC Health infectious disease specialist Dr. Michelle Barron sees a lot of fails at the grocery store.
Of course, I don't say anything, but I sort of think about it. I'm like, how many times have you gone under your mask? You just had an itch and you didn't really think about it. And you didn't think about where your hands had been 5 seconds before.
Wearing it right is key.
It's under the nose or it's up here. For it to work, cover your nose, tight fit around your face under the chin.
Getting it off is another artful movement.
You don't want to touch the front part of the mask. It could be contaminated with droplets. So you want to just untuck it from behind your ears and carefully put it down on a table or in a paper bag to store for later.
Washing is okay for cloth masks, but not paper. And good old-fashioned, powerful Colorado sunshine for 20 minutes a side should kill the virus. So you can again don your new fashion.
I want to protect other people.
And that's a good question. Alan Janae covering Colorado First.
Michigan's Republican-led legislature is suing the state's Democratic governor. In an effort to stop an extension of the lockdown there, hundreds gathered at the state capitol on Thursday in protest, including some with guns. Michigan has reported more than 41,000 cases of COVID-19, but less than 2% of residents have been tested. Adriana Diaz has more.
It's just like having your heart ripped from your body.
Kayla Carruthers' mother, Deborah Gatewood, worked at Beaumont Hospital outside Detroit, drawing blood for 31 years. But when she came down with a fever last month, her daughter says that same hospital denied her a COVID test more than once.
How many times did she try to get tested?
4 times.
And every time, what happened?
She got sent home each time. She lost faith in the whole healthcare system.
So your mom, a healthcare worker, lost faith in the healthcare system.
Isn't that crazy?
Beaumont Health told CBS News, "We're doing everything we can to evaluate, triage, and care for patients based on the information we know at the time. We grieve the loss of any patient." Helping Michigan families, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer has since expanded testing criteria to include milder symptoms and all essential workers.
We spoke to one of your constituents who lost her mother to COVID-19 after being turned away from a testing center 4 times. Did you expand that criteria too late?
I think that's the saddest reality of a country that was underprepared for a global pandemic. The fact that we've never had enough tests, that the federal government didn't prepare, contributes to the fact that we had to ration tests at the front end of this pandemic. And I recognize that lives were lost.
Testing has doubled in recent weeks, but shortages of swabs and chemical solution are still an issue.
The CDC guidelines are that we should be testing between 1% to 2% of our population over the course of a week in order to have some confidence that it's safe to reopen. And it's going to be a little while before we get there.
The governor's goal is to test at least 14,000 people a day. Right now, they're doing roughly half that. The epicenter is the Detroit area, which accounts for more than 70% of the state's cases, and disproportionately people of color.
Ready? All right.
There, walk-up testing has been set up to reach residents without cars. Has it been hard for you to get a test?
Not nowadays.
In Grand Rapids, because of expanded criteria and more state funding, we found a 25% increase in testing at Cherry Health. Tasha Blackman is the CEO.
So we do have enough testing kits, but we're really short on gowns. We're also short on N95 masks. We cannot expand further without any additional personal protective equipment.
They also can't expand testing because of recent staffing cuts.
Cherry Health has laid off about 25% of our staff.
Wow. And at a time like this.
Exactly.
By executive order, the governor has shut down most of the economy, drawing ire from a small but vocal minority. Some think she's gone too far, like Sheriff Ted Schendel of rural Benzie County.
Keep in mind, we're on executive order number 60.
I detect you feel a certain way about that.
Well, yeah, because it's just one right after the other. It's a one-size-fits-all kind of approach. Well, I can use my county example. We have 0 deaths. Let's give us a chance to get out, go back to work, put food on the table for our families.
But the governor says testing above all else will help determine when to fully reopen.
Some people will think we should move faster. I'm going to listen to the public health experts, and I'm going to work with the business side of the equation to make sure that we've got the protocols to keep people safe when it is safe to start to re-engage.
The governor said she may further open the economy region by region if the data shows it's safe. Now, putting Michigan back to work won't make up for the roughly $3 billion the state estimates it'll lose due to the pandemic. Adriana Diaz, CBS News, Niles, Michigan.
And coming up after a break, a Washington Post investigation finds 3 of the country's largest meat processors failed to follow safety protocols and protect workers. We'll speak with one of the authors of this piece. Plus, thousands of essential workers go on strike, what they're demanding from some major corporations. Canada has banned the use and trade of assault-style weapons. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made the announcement on Friday. The decision, he said, would take effect immediately. He cited several mass shootings in the country, including an attack in Nova Scotia nearly 2 weeks ago.
Today, we are closing the market for military-grade assault weapons in Canada. We are banning 1,500 models and variants of these firearms by way of regulations. These weapons were designed for one purpose and one purpose only: to kill the largest number of people in the shortest amount of time. There is no use and no place for such weapons in Canada.
The government order does not forbid ownership of military-style weapons. Demonstrators across the U.S. rallied for workers' rights on Friday to mark International Workers' Day. Organizers say essential employees of companies like Amazon, Target, and FedEx have become unexpected frontline workers. They're demanding more protections during the pandemic. That includes hazard pay, sick leave, personal protective equipment, and cleaning supplies. Some workers striked. Amazon employees seen here walked off of the job in Richmond, California, or called in sick. Meanwhile, Amazon reported a record $75.4 billion in sales for the first 3 months of the year. The e-commerce giant said that North American sales rose 29%. The cost to fulfill customer orders also jumped 34%, with the company hiring more workers and increasing pay. Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos says that the company will spend at least $4 billion on costs related to the outbreak in the next 3 months. That includes providing more protective gear for workers, deep cleaning of the warehouses, and developing internal testing capabilities. A number of meat processing plants are facing backlash over their handling of the pandemic. Several facilities across the U.S. have become hotspots for the coronavirus. Now union leaders and health officials are claiming some plant employees were required to show up for work despite testing positive for COVID-19. A Washington Post investigation found 3 of the country's largest meat processors have failed to follow safety protocols, including providing employees with proper protective gear. Taylor Teleford is one of the reporters of that article and joins me now. Taylor, what alleged violations by these processing plants really stand out to you the most?
Sure. So I think for starters, it should be said that these plants are places that were likely to experience some kind of outbreak anyway. These workers are in extremely close quarters. They're doing fast-paced work where they're often standing side by side to one another on the processing line. And if they're not side by side on the processing line, then they are often in crowded break rooms or in crowded restrooms or changing. But with that said, a lot of these companies failed to provide adequate personal protective equipment. They often overlooked or looked the other way when workers were showing up with positive temperatures and allowing them to work on the job after cooling off. And a lot of them have also not done an adequate job of giving employees information about outbreaks in their ranks. And so workers are knowing that people around them are getting sick, that they're being exposed to the virus, likely taking it home to their families, but they are not being told when they are coming into close contact with other people who have likely had it.
So what will happen to these companies, Taylor?
Well, based on the executive order that came out earlier this week, a lot of these companies are making the argument that they should be allowed to continue their operations without any kind of alteration. A lot of them have expressed major concern about the potential for food shortages and for struggles in the supply chain. But what that means for the workers is that they'll likely be put back in the situation where they're feeling called to show up for work by the federal government despite having to work without adequate protections.
Yeah, and in your article you point out that the processing capacity is already down 25%. It will be interesting to see how these companies now respond and how government watchers respond. You also found that some workers at distribution centers were afraid to touch product coming out of meat processing plants. Is there any reason that consumers should be concerned as well?
You know, at this point, the USDA and the FDA have been very adamant that it is not likely that the disease can be transmitted over surfaces like on packaging. But with that said, it hasn't been studied. So I think what's worrying those workers and what the public has a right to be worried by is the fact that we haven't really researched that enough to be able to say for certain that that's not possible. I spoke with a worker, actually two workers, who one actually lost her job after refusing to accept a shipment from the Sioux Falls plant, the Smithfield plant, which is now one of the biggest coronavirus hotspots in the country. And she was let go after she refused to receive it. And I spoke with another worker who experienced the same thing. Only difference is he decided to handle it because he wanted to keep his job.